someone told you 1,000 years ago a group of people carved an entire temple straight out of a mountain, you'd probably think it was impossible. Yet in Western India, there's proof it happened. A single hill of volcanic rock turned into one of the most complex religious structures on Earth, the Kailasa Temple of Ellora. Every wall, every column, every sculpture you see here was once part of the same mountain. Experts estimate that around 400,000 tons of rock were removed, but no one knows where that rock went. There are no piles, no pits, no trace of it anywhere. Even stranger, the workers who made it left no blueprints, no written plans, not even a single record of how it was done. Modern engineers still scratch their heads. The precision, the scale, the balance, all carved by hand into basalt so tough it can blunt steel. How did they know where to cut without collapsing the whole mountain? How did they keep the symmetry perfect when every mistake was irreversible? The story of Kailasa starts with a landscape that almost seems designed to test anyone who tries to shape it. The Deccan region of India looks quiet today, with rolling plateaus and dark cliffs spread across the horizon. But that calm surface hides a violent past. Around 65 to 75 million years back, this entire stretch of land was flooded by one of the biggest volcanic events in Earth's history. Lava didn't come in an occasional burst, it flowed in waves, layer after layer, building a geological cake of hardened basalt that now covers hundreds of thousands of square miles. This basalt cooled into thick, stubborn slabs stacked on top of one another. When the lava hardened, it formed natural columns, ridges, and vertical seams that locked into each other like a puzzle you can only break with stubborn effort. Wind and rain barely affected it. Even rivers struggled to carve it. This was stone that refused to budge. Builders working with sandstone or limestone could at least guide the direction of their chisels. Basalt pushed back. It resisted. It cracked only when it wanted to, and when it cracked the wrong way, it could ruin everything around it. This is where the challenge begins. Carving a delicate temple out of this kind of material is like convincing metal to behave like clay. The rock holds secrets inside it, hidden fractures, sudden weaknesses, pockets of trapped minerals. A master could study the surface, tap it, listen to the sound and guess what might lie inside. Yet the ancient craftsmen didn't avoid it. They chose it. Not because it was easy, but because it was durable. A temple carved out of basalt wouldn't crumble in a few centuries. It would outlast kingdoms, invasions, and weather cycles. When they picked this mountain for Kailasa, they were setting the stage for something that would stand long after their names were forgotten. The basalt formations in the Deccan Traps behave in a specific way. They form horizontal layers, but also develop vertical joints. That means there are natural lines where the stone can split. If an artisan works with these joints, the stone cuts cleaner. Work against them, and the rock retaliates with cracks that travel where you don't want them to. And there was another harsh reality. They didn't have the luxury of seeing the interior before they carved it. Carving downward meant removing the entire outer shell to reveal what they needed inside. They were carving blind, relying on the judgment of guild leaders who knew how basalt behaved through decades of experience. And every new level had its own structural risks. Removing too much material too early could make the rock above collapse. Removing too little would trap them in a shape that couldn't be corrected later. And that raises the question, who had the authority, the resources, and the confidence to begin a project this risky? That answer lies in a dynasty that rarely gets talked about today, yet once controlled some of the wealthiest and most culturally vibrant regions of the subcontinent. The Lost Empire. Behind the miracle. If you flip through most modern history books, the Rashtrakutas barely get a paragraph. But between the 6th and 10th centuries, they ruled a massive stretch of the Indian subcontinent, from the rivers of Karnataka up toward what is now Uttar Pradesh. Their capitals were centres of learning, trade, and art. Poets wrote under their patronage, mathematicians debated new ideas, and architects pushed the limits of stone until they reached projects like Kailasa. This was a dynasty filled with rulers who thought beyond the everyday concerns of kingship. They invested in temples, water systems, and cultural projects that attracted scholars from far beyond their borders. Even their enemies respected their taste. Travelers wrote about the prestige of their courts, the order of their administration, and the ambition that shaped every large project under their name. The breakthrough moment for linking the Rashtrakutas to Kailasa came from a discovery in the 1920s. In Baroda, now part of Gujarat, a set of ancient copper plate inscriptions surfaced. These plates carried detailed royal records, grants, achievements, victories, and temple dedications. And one line stood out, a reference to King Krishna, commissioning a temple at Ellora so astonishing that even the gods would be surprised. It was a poetic line, but it matched the scale and timing of Kailasa almost too perfectly. Krishnathatsa ruled in the 8th century and had a reputation for being both devout and determined. Some inscriptions describe him as a leader who believed religious devotion was public responsibility. But historians are divided on how exactly the project unfolded. One group argues that Krishna's father, Danti Durga, started the original work. They point to stylistic traces in some of the earliest carvings that resemble earlier Rashtrakuta structures. Others think Krishna I alone initiated it, pushing the project far beyond anything his predecessors attempted. And there's a third view. Multiple kings, across decades, added their own layers to the temple, each one respecting the master plan handed down through the generations. This highlights how unusual Kailasa is. Most ancient temples reveal layers from different periods, changes in architecture, modifications in layout, shifts in carving style. Kailasa, however, looks unified. It feels like one mind designed the entire structure, even if many hands created it. That suggests that the Rashtrakutas didn't treat this as a temporary project. They treated it as a legacy mission, meant to outlast every reign and align with the dynasty's identity. So what did the temple represent for them? It was a declaration, a demonstration that their kingdom was capable of reshaping nature itself. When rivals built temples from the ground up, the Rashtrakutas carved theirs from a mountain. When others showcased their devotion through ornament, the Rashtrakutas showcased theirs through engineering that bordered on impossible. The deeper you dive into the story of Kailasa, the more one detail keeps catching your attention. A project of this size should have left behind instructions. Something. A sketch on palm leaf, a diagram, a draft. Anything that explains how to carve a mountain into a multi-level monument without collapsing half the structure in the process. But nothing has survived. All we have is the final result, standing there as if it appeared fully formed. That absence creates tension. You're looking at a structure that required more planning than many modern skyscrapers, yet the people behind it didn't leave a trace of the planning itself. And because nothing survived, we're left to reverse engineer the logic. When experts stand in front of Kailasa today, they see deliberate steps that had to occur in a certain order, with an exact understanding of scale, weight, and symmetry. Before a single strike hit the rock, someone had to answer questions that even engineers today would take weeks to calculate. The first question was volume. How much material had to be removed from the mountain? The temple wasn't built inside a cave. It was carved free from the surrounding rock, which means the builders had to know the temple's shape, height, and footprint. Before the first cut, they had to look at the bare mountain and know where the edges of the future courtyard would be. They had to know how far down they could carve without hitting unstable rock. They had to know where the roofline of the inner sanctum was going to sit, long before reaching it. The second question involved alignment. The inside of Kailasa matches the outside with surprising accuracy. Chambers line up with external sculptures. Hallways meet perfectly where they're supposed to. Columns stand exactly where the geometry demands. This only works if you know the internal plan before you touch the surface. There's no freedom to shift a column a few inches to the left. There's no option to adjust a wall after digging into it. Everything has to be perfect the first time. The third question was structural integrity. Carving downward into a mountain isn't as simple as removing layers. Each layer has weight. Each layer supports the one above. To create a hollow hall inside, you must know how thick the remaining roof should be. Too thin, and it collapses. Too thick, and you lose the proportions. You can't carve the interior first. You can't carve the exterior first. You have to carve both in a synchronized dance, keeping the rock stable throughout the process. And finally, they had to coordinate multiple teams working simultaneously on different levels. Kailasa was carved by hundreds of workers, chipped away at different parts at the same time. If the team on the north side carved faster, the geometry could tilt. If the team inside carved deeper than planned, the exterior wall could weaken. Every team had to know the plan down to the last inch. Every strike had to follow the same master vision. That is why the most accepted theory today is the top-down method. The artisans began at the peak of the mountain and worked downward, freeing the temple from solid stone like a sculptor frees a statue from marble. Instead of building upward with stone blocks, they subtracted the mountain layer by layer. This demanded incredible patience. They couldn't see the finished form while working. They had to trust the plan, they had to trust their calculations, and they had to trust each other. The first major step wasn't carving the temple itself, it was carving the empty space around it. The courtyard that surrounds Kailasa was a vertical excavation. Workers cut deep trenches into the mountain, slicing enormous shafts straight down around the temple's perimeter. They removed thousands of tons of basalt just to uncover the rough outline of the future structure. If you were to watch the process with time sped up, you'd see the mountain shrink while the temple rises from within it. Each level removed exposes a new outline. After the courtyard emerged, they began defining the main body of the temple. The shape became clearer with every layer carved away. What modern machines would do with scanning software and 3D modeling, the ancient workers did with training, repetition, and visual memory. The logic of the process feels similar to a 3D printer, but in reverse. A printer adds thin layers until the shape is complete. Kailasa's builders removed layers until the shape appeared. Each descending level had to be mapped before the next cut. They had to know which parts of the rock should remain untouched because those sections would become pillars, walls, or ceilings. They also had to know which areas needed to be hollowed out later. It becomes even more impressive when you notice the architecture's balance. The columns in the hall stand in ikam tuninataina, perfect alignment. The walls maintain consistent thickness throughout. The central tower rises along a flawless axis. All of this was carved from the same block. No part could be replaced. No part could be corrected after removal. If a column cracked, they couldn't install a new one. If a wall tilted slightly, the entire symmetry collapsed. Their only option was perfection. Every chisel stroke carried weight. Every decision shaped not just the form, but the stability of everything around it. There was no trial run, no test site, no smaller version carved beforehand. All planning went directly into the mountain. And yet, for all this engineering pressure, the builders didn't stop at creating a stable structure. After they shaped the massive centerpiece of the temple, they began the next phase, a phase that required just as much skill, but a completely different mindset. It was time to decorate the mountain they had just carved. Once the structure stood in its rough form, the workers faced a new challenge. They had a giant block shaped like a temple, but it wasn't alive yet. The spirit of Kailasa lies in its carvings, the stories, the gods, the animals, the scenes that turn blank rock into narrative. This was the moment when architects stepped aside and artists stepped forward. The temple's skin is covered with sculptures. On one side, Shiva appears in a calm, meditative form. On another, he takes on a fearsome posture. Nearby, Parvati stands with delicate expressions carved into her face. Close to the entrance, massive panels show moments from ancient texts, battles from the Mahabharata, adventures from the Ramayana, and stories from the Puranas that once echoed across this part of India. Even the corners and pillars are decorated with celestial guardians, musicians, dancers, and mythical beings. Many of the panels stretch across massive walls. Some carvings tower higher than a person. The details are so refined that the lines of clothing, jewelry, and facial features still stand out centuries later. In some panels, the folds of garments bend naturally. In others, hair strands flow as if caught in movement. This level of detail on basalt, a stone known for being stubborn and resistant, speaks volumes about the skill required, and that leads to the first challenge the sculptors faced. Basalt doesn't allow mistakes. Softer stones give you room to refine. You can carve deeper if necessary. You can smooth out edges. Basalt punishes hesitation. Once you remove a part of the rock, it's gone. If a nose breaks off, there's no repairing it. If an arm chips, the sculptor has to reshape the entire figure to hide the damage. That means every movement must be confident. Every decision has to be final. The second challenge was structural. The detailed sculptures couldn't be done early because deep carvings weaken surfaces. If the upper structure wasn't fully stable, putting heavy detail on lower walls could cause stress cracks. The carvings had to wait until the main frame was secure. That meant sculptors had to coordinate with structural workers constantly. If a mason carved too much on one side, he risked destabilizing a column. If a sculptor cut a deep seam before the column above was fully shaped, the whole surface could fail. This process required careful sequencing. Sections at the top were carved first. Once those were complete, workers moved downward in a controlled manner. The coordination between teams had to be exact. Sculptors couldn't jump ahead. They could only move when structural experts approved the surface. This rhythm shows a workflow that wasn't chaotic or freelance. It was organized like a large workshop, where each group knew precisely when their phase began. Families likely played a major role. Stonecraft was inherited. Skills were passed from parent to child, and many of the workers at Kailasa probably grew up hearing the sound of chisels long before holding one themselves. This continuity explains the consistency and style across the temple. The flows, proportions, and gestures match, because many of the artists followed the same training lineage. That's also why much of this knowledge is lost now. When the families of craftsmen moved on, disappeared, or shifted to other trades, the techniques they used faded with them. These methods weren't written down, they were taught through practice. The exact ways they struck basalt, the angles they favoured, the tricks they used to avoid fractures, all were part of a shared culture that eventually dissolved. And once the outer surfaces were alive with figures and stories, the workers turned their attention inward. The inside of Kailasa demanded a whole new level of engineering mixed with artistry. The pillars, halls, and shrines were waiting for the same treatment. Walking into Kailasa feels like stepping into a hidden world. The exterior already sets the tone with its size and depth, but the inside is where the precision hits hardest. The moment you enter the main hall, the scale stops you. The space stretches about 70 feet from the doorway to the rear wall, with a width of 62 feet. The ceiling rises high above, supported by massive stone pillars that look too symmetrical, too evenly spaced, and too polished to be hand-carved. Yet they are. Each one was carved directly from the mountain, shaped without moving an inch from its original position. The hall isn't empty. The pillars are arranged with purpose, creating a path that leads toward the heart of the temple, the inner sanctum. Inside that sanctum sits a towering Shiva lingam, carved from the same stone. There's no separate block, no installation, no joints. The sanctum rises around it like a protective chamber, shaped high enough to give the lingam presence without overwhelming the space. This alone shows how well the builders understood proportion and acoustics. A whisper inside the sanctum carries farther than you expect, but the complexity doesn't end there. Kailasa has 2 full levels of shrines wrapping around the central hall. These shrines run like a stone maze, connected by narrow paths, staircases, and carved corridors. You can walk around the temple on one level, then climb upward to another path that circles the structure from above. Every shrine holds its own sculptures and motifs. No two are identical, yet all follow the same architectural logic. Creating these levels required flawless alignment. The upper shrines stand directly above the lower ones, supported by pillars that were carved deep into the mountain without losing their strength. The most surprising feature inside the complex is the stone bridge. When you look up from the main courtyard, you see a carved walkway stretching from the outer gateway to the upper floor of the temple. This isn't a separate piece added later. It was carved from the same mountain block. Workers had to hollow out the space below it while keeping the bridge intact. They had to know exactly how much stone could be removed before tension forced the bridge to crack. Today, engineers calculate tensile strength using computers and sensors. 1,200 years ago, artisans relied on instinct shaped by training and experience. Ventilation and light also show remarkable planning. A structure this deep inside a mountain should be dark and humid, but Kailasa isn't. Workers carved openings and windows at strategic points, allowing natural light to filter through the hallways. Some openings are narrow, guiding a thin ray of sunlight towards specific parts of the temple. Others are wider, allowing entire sections to breathe. This prevents the build-up of a moisture, which would have damaged the carvings over time. They had to balance brightness with structural stability, carving openings only where the rock could support the weight above. Humidity was another issue. Without ventilation, moisture trapped inside the mountain could weaken the stone or lead to mold. The artisans prevented this by carving channels that encouraged air circulation. The design creates a natural airflow pattern, pulling cool air into lower sections and pushing warm air upward and out. The result is a space that feels open, not suffocating, despite being carved out of one enormous block of basalt. Water management was just as important. Monsoon rains hit the region hard, and without drainage, the temple would flood every year. The builders solved this by carving grooves and channels into the rock around the courtyard and along the outer walls. These pathways guide rainwater away from the structure, preventing standing water. The system works so efficiently that even modern conservationists study it to understand ancient engineering techniques. The grooves look decorative at first glance, but they're functional designs meant to protect the entire monument. Then there's the flooring. The floors across the temple are surprisingly level. The workers had no laser tools, no modern leveling systems, and no mechanical assistance. They measured by hand, using simple instruments paired with a sharp eye. Leveling such large surfaces required constant checking and correction. Too much removal in one spot, and the entire area had to be recalculated. A floor that dips slightly throws off the symmetry of pillars and shrines. A floor that rises too much disrupts the path of the visitor. The final result is a surface that feels deliberate and controlled, not uneven or accidental. Even the steps and stairways tell a story. Each staircase is carved to consistent height and depth. If any step were off, the entire rhythm would break. Carving steps directly from rock leaves no room for redoing a mistake. A wrong angle could chip off part of a step or weaken the pillar beside it. The artisans kept everything aligned because they worked with careful coordination. But all this engineering brilliance leads to a question that keeps baffling researchers. If this entire monument was carved by removing stone, then where did the stone go? The vanished debris. The more you study Kailasa, the more the missing debris becomes a central puzzle. You're talking about removing around 400,000 tons of stone from a hill, enough to fill multiple stadiums from the ground up. There should be piles of rubble somewhere. There should be mounds of broken basalt. There should be ancient dump sites or traces of discarded material in nearby valleys. But none have been found, not even fragments. It's as if the mountain carved itself clean. This absence creates one of the most unusual mysteries in ancient architecture. How do you remove that much stone without leaving visible evidence? The builders didn't leave records describing their methods. No carvings show workers transporting rock. No inscriptions mention where the waste went. The only thing we know is that the rock once existed, and now it doesn't. One straightforward explanation is transportation. The debris may have been moved far from the site and used in other construction projects. Basalt fragments can be repurposed for road foundations, wall bases, or general filling work. If the debris was spread across multiple settlements, no single location would stand out today. Over centuries, those settlements decayed, rebuilt, or vanished, taking the evidence with them. Another theory suggests the debris was crushed and used to stabilize building sites around the region. Ancient builders were known to grind stones for leveling or reinforcement in. If Kailasa's waste was broken down into smaller pieces and mixed with soil, it would blend naturally with the landscape. Later agricultural activity or erosion could erase remaining traces. Some researchers propose that the debris was dumped into old depressions or dried riverbeds. Basalt chunks placed in a natural basin would eventually settle and get covered by layers of sediment. Over centuries, mud, plant matter, and water movement could bury the stone deep enough that modern surveys wouldn't find it unless they dug extensively. Then there's the idea of gradual removal. Kailasa took decades or even longer. Workers may have removed debris continuously in small quantities. If each group transported a manageable amount during each phase, the distribution would be so wide that no clear dumping ground would remain. This steady dispersal could explain why nothing stands out today. But the biggest challenge was manpower. Moving 400,000 tons of stone without modern carts or machinery required an enormous workforce. And ancient India had it. Guilds, craftsmen, seasonal laborers, and community workers were often involved in long-term temple projects. Such manpower wasn't unusual for the period. Large empires had entire communities dedicated to construction. These people weren't working for a week or a month. They worked for years, often treating the project as both employment and service. Transporting debris likely involved long lines of workers carrying baskets, dragging sledges, or using wooden carts. The work was slow but steady. When thousands of people commit to a task over decades, even a mountain of rock becomes manageable. There's also an uncomfortable but realistic possibility: some debris may have simply eroded. If workers stored discarded stone on slopes or near natural drainage paths, centuries of monsoon rains could wash it away. Basalt fragments are heavy but not immune to weather. Repeated flooding could push debris into deeper soil layers or scatter it across a valley, where it blended into the environment. Still, the complete disappearance of so much material leaves room for speculation. It's one of the reasons the temple attracts theories that go beyond mainstream explanations. Some people argue that the lack of debris suggests unknown techniques or hidden methods, pushing the conversation toward extreme interpretations. But whether those ideas hold weight or not, the missing debris remains a puzzle worth examining. Kailasa's design comes from a specific idea: creating a physical representation of Shiva's cosmic home. In Hindu mythology, the god Shiva resides on Mount Kailash, a peak associated with meditation, destruction, rebirth, and balance. By carving Kailasa Temple directly from a mountain, the builders were creating a symbolic version of Shiva's divine abode on Earth. That symbolism begins with orientation. The temple faces east so the first rays of sunlight enter the sanctum. Light touching the Shiva lingam at dawn reflects the idea of creation emerging from darkness. For ancient worshippers, this was spiritually meaningful. The direction, the timing, and the alignment were carefully calculated. Around the temple stand shrines and guardians placed in positions that mirror cosmic roles. Figures that stand at gateways represent protection. Deities placed along the northern and southern sides reflect stories tied to those directions. Even the positioning of Nandi, Shiva's sacred bull, follows ritual logic. Nandi sits facing the main sanctum, symbolizing unwavering devotion. The carved elephants at the base are more than decorative elements. In Hindu symbolism, elephants represent the foundation of the world: strength, patience, and stability. Placing them beneath the temple's weight symbolized the idea that cosmic order supports divine presence. Panels across the temple show scenes from epics. These aren't arranged at random. Episodes linked to duty appear where visitors first enter. Stories tied to inner reflection appear deeper in the halls. Scenes of conflict appear on broader walls, while scenes of peace appear close to the sanctums. The height of the central tower also carries meaning. A tall shikhara represents ascension. Walking around the temple, visitors experience movement around a spiritual axis. Walking toward the tower, they move inward, toward the divine center. The architecture physically imitates the journey from the material world towards spiritual clarity. One of the strongest symbolic features is the temple's creation process itself, carving downward. Most temples are built upward, with blocks and beams. Kailasa descends into the earth. This downward carving mirrors myths about Shiva, descending into deep meditation, withdrawing from the world before returning with clarity and power. Visitors entering the temple move downward through space, in the same way spiritual seekers descend inward through reflection. Even water channels carry symbolic meaning. They guide rainwater around the temple, protecting it. In Hindu thought, water represents purification. Flowing water around the temple reflects the idea of cyclical cleansing. The temple stands steady while the world's elements move around it. And there's another point, something easy to overlook. They put their mastery into the rock, trusting that the result would speak for itself long after they were gone. And it does. When you stand in front of Kailasa, you don't wonder who built it to boost their reputation. You wonder how such a vast collaboration maintained such unity of vision. You wonder how thousands of people, across generations, kept faith in a project they weren't guaranteed to see completed. You wonder how a society could train artisans so thoroughly that they carved a mountain as if it were a block of wood. That's the quiet lesson hidden inside the basalt. human brilliance isn't always documented. Sometimes it's buried, sometimes it's forgotten, sometimes it survives only through the work itself. Kailasa shows that a civilization can leave behind a message louder than any written record. We understood far more than you think.